Although 2/3 of the world's surface is covered with water, scientists know less about the oceans than they do about the surface of the moon. That can be said about fresh water here in Missouri. Joining me today on this edition of Newsmakers are two environmental health and safety majors, Avery Cousins and Tim Peternell, to talk about their study on plastics in local waterways. Thanks for joining us. So tell me what this research project is all about, Avery, and why you decided to pick it.
So this project is about establishing the baseline levels of how much microplastic there are within the Spring River watershed, which is the watershed that encompasses Joplin and the surrounding area. And microplastics are just plastics that have been made smaller than 5 millimeters.
And what made you decide to pick this topic?
Largely because no one else had actually looked within this topic at all, either in freshwater or in the area at all. So the novelty of it was appealing.
And how about you?
I think, along with what Avery said, I read some articles about microplastic contamination in the ocean, and then I like to fish a lot, so I go out to the different rivers and creeks and stuff around here, and I see a lot of plastic, like larger plastic litter, and so I know there's a lot of that in the ocean, and that contributes, and so I was just really curious to see what the microplastic load was in this watershed.
And it's just a subject that interests you.
Yeah, definitely.
And tell us what microplastics you found, or what did you think you were going to find in Spring River?
So we split our projects up between the sediment and the actual water column itself. I looked specifically at the sediment, and Tim looked at the water column. Speaking for myself, I expected to find microplastics within the sediment, and I expected to find more after the waterways flow through a high volume of high population areas, and I did not find that.
And that's a good thing, I guess, to a degree.
To a degree. We actually ended up and did not find microplastics within the sediment at all. So we're looking at other methodologies and other habitats that we could be sampling for as well.
And Tim, yours was a different outcome.
Yeah, mine was a bit different. So we did find microplastics in every single one of our samples, and I don't know that we really expected to find them in all of our samples, because there were some springs and stuff. We sampled one spring, and we really weren't expecting to find anything in that. We did find a few, and then we were kind of expecting just the same with Avery's, the larger areas would have more microplastics, but that wasn't what we found. We just found that there were microplastics in every sample, and there really wasn't a relationship between whether or not it was in an urban or rural area, or whether it was upstream or downstream of a town, which were two of the main things we were looking at. So the results were a little bit unexpected, but we did find quite a few. So I guess I shouldn't say quite a few. We found them in every single sample. So. And
what does it mean to the average person? Why does this matter?
I think it's just because they're out there. They do have an impact on especially organism health. Their impact on human health is still a little bit, we're not 100% sure on that, but they definitely do have an impact on organisms. We all use plastics. Synthetic clothing is actually, interestingly enough, a big contributor because of the amount of fibers that are shed from clothing whenever it's washed. And so I think it's something that, we all use plastic, and we all make a contribution to the microplastics that are in our environment. And so I think that's some of the reasons why, the average person should be concerned about this.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And Congress passed the Microbead Free Waters Act in 2015, and this law required manufacturers of these tiny plastic beads to stop putting them in cosmetics and other personal care items completely by 2019. Here's a short video explaining what microbeads are and why they are dangerous to not only the fish and wildlife that might consume them, but also to humans.
Microbeads are small, little, predominantly spherical pieces of plastic that are incorporated into toothpaste, body wash, face washes, some cosmetics, in order to generally abrade the skin. They're incorporated into these products that, basically are intended to be used and then washed down the drain, without really having the foresight as to what happens to these particles once they do wash down the drain. Every time we wash our face or brush our teeth with one of these products, we're probably using somewhere in the neighborhood of thousands to tens of thousands of plastic particles. Hundreds of thousands of them are being released from wastewater treatment plants every day into nearby bodies of water. But the size of the microbeads are so incredibly small that makes them very easy to be ingested by organisms that live in the water. Things from plankton on up to fish and on up to the birds that eat the fish. Microbeads really didn't start being included in products until the 1990s. So prior to the 1990s, we exfoliated, but we used natural products, things like sugar, salt, ground up seeds. So our concern with microplastics being ingested is not actually death. What we're more concerned about is something that is much more subtle. And the fact that these beads, as they're in the water, actually become kind of like chemical sponges. So they will absorb chemicals that are within the water of the Great Lakes. This fish eats a piece of plastic, the chemicals desorb into that fish, well then that fish gets eaten by another fish. And the chemicals move up and up the food chain, and what's at the top of the food chain? It's us.
And one thing, when I watched that video and several others, which they're older videos because the law went into effect, but I had no idea that it was in your cosmetics, your body scrubs, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You guys probably knew that. I mean,
we found that out, yeah. And it is amazing how, plastics, they're in just about everything. So yeah. A lot of things you wouldn't even necessarily think of, there are plastics in them.
Yeah, that's incredible. And how did you collect your samples?
So looking at specifically the sediment, we looked specifically within the riffle habitat of streams, and what that would mean is it's typically a shallower area with rocky bottom and very flat, fast-moving water, and we looked at that area because it has a very high level of biodiversity, so there's many different kinds of species there, so it was important to get that information. And we looked at a 50-meter section of that and took 15 random samples from there, and then homogenized those into the same one site sample. And from there, we used a two-step isolation process to isolate the microplastics themselves from the rest of the sediment, which we didn't really want.
And because you didn't find any, that was probably tougher because you looked for it, right? It definitely presented unexpected complications. Yeah. And you guys, you collected these samples in December, and it was really cold. How tough was that?
It made it more difficult than it could have been if it was summer.
Right. And was the process itself of examining for you, Tim, was it difficult to find the plastics, or were they pretty prevalent?
It really just depended on the sample site. There were a few that it was fairly difficult. There was one that had a lot of rocks in it. Somehow they, I guess, were floating up in the water column. But anyway, so I mean, that one, they were buried under a few things that, for the most part, I mean, it really was dependent upon how many microplastics there were. So there was one that had like 25 particles in it. That one was pretty easy to find them. There was one that only had 2, so it was a little bit more difficult to find those. But
and do you examine the microplastics for toxins, like they were saying? And what I've researched is that the microplastics absorb the toxins. Did you guys get into that detail of it?
No, so we didn't get into that part of it. We were just looking at basically like whether or not they were in the Spring River watershed, mm-hmm. and those are all things that we could look at, like future research could look into for sure. Yeah.
So what do you have expectation level wise for what comes next with your research or for your research?
Well, for the sediment side of things, for sure, we wouldn't look at other areas of the stream because there's, I spoke about the riffle habitat specifically, but there are other specific habitats within the same stream. We also want to look at lakes and things like that. Like the Spring River watershed eventually drains into Grand Lake, so we want to look at that to see if once the water slows down into a lake habitat, if this microplastics settle out into the sediment in that area.
And that would make sense. Mm-hmm. And do you think that your study will provide something for future researchers to look at that could help them? I don't know. Does it make state regulations, or how far and how big could your research go?
The research could and should get as big as people will take it. It was important to establish that there are microplastics here to begin with, so that we can begin working forwards from there.
Mm-hmm. And it's not something that people think about. They just use the product
Yeah.
and like you were saying, it comes off of your clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what does that do for the environment? I mean,
So really it just, you do get a lot. So fibers are one of the more prevalent types, and what we found, or what I found in my study here with the water column, was that fibers were the most prevalent type of microplastic. And those are typically what you're going to find that are shedding off of synthetic fiber clothing. And so you're contributing a lot of those with synthetic clothing whenever it's washed. And then I think just one of the big environmental impacts really with all of them is that they do remain in the environment for pretty much forever. They really don't go away unless they're removed. And so whatever the type is, they're going to be remaining there for a very long period of time.
and then the fish eat them.
Yeah.
And then whatever happens after that, we eat the fish, or some of it, the plankton could eat it, and then it's just sort of just flows up the food chain, right?
Yeah, that's known as bioaccumulation. It moves up the food chain like that, and when pollution do things like that, it typically becomes the largest problem for the things at the top of the food chain, like people or
Right.
eagles or the animals that we often find important.
Right. Because birds eat fish, and then whatever happens after that. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming on the show. And when we come back, we'll talk to a couple of their professors about this important project. Stay tuned.
Welcome to this month's Nature's Calling. I'm Lucas Bond with the Missouri Department of Conservation. Spring is finally here, and it's time to get outside to start looking for some of the tastiest mushrooms around, morels. Morel mushrooms are treasured both for their amazing flavor and for the fun of the hunt. Morels have a short growing season in the spring. Usually they pop up in mid-April, and the season lasts until mid-May, depending on the weather and where you are in the state. But where can you find these tasty mushrooms?
Generally speaking, woodlands and forests are the most favored spots, but sometimes you'll have people that find them in fields and field edges just as well.
Missouri has many varieties of edible and non-edible mushrooms. If you are not 100% positive of the ID, don't eat it. To help identify mushrooms, check out the Conservation Department's publication called A Guide to Missouri's Edible and Poisonous Mushrooms. It can be found at regional offices and nature centers around the state. After you're through mushroom hunting, take some time to enjoy Missouri's beautiful flowering trees. Even before a hint of green hits the landscape, the Show Me State's native trees fill the woods with color. Witch hazel's yellow ribbon-like flowers are the first to show color, but it's the serviceberry that announces spring is here. Serviceberry is the first that people will notice because of the big mass of white flowers. Next, look for the eye-popping masses of the pink flowering redbud, which usually peaks during April, with blooms lasting to early May. Lastly, since we celebrate Arbor Day in April, I encourage everyone to get outside and plant a tree for all Missourians to enjoy. April is the month known for spring cleaning, so why not get outside, discover nature, and get your hands dirty by helping clean the environment by joining a local stream team. For more than 30 years, Stream Team volunteers have worked to keep Missouri rivers and streams clean and healthy. Stream teams adopt portions of streams to conduct surveys and take on projects like cleanup and planting new trees. Stream teams provide opportunities for all Missourians to get involved in river conservation. Just check out their website, mostreamteam.org, to learn more about how you can take part in cleanups throughout the state.
Stream teams are groups of Missouri citizens that are passionate about our stream resources. They're cleaning up our waterways, conducting water quality monitoring, stenciling storm drains, and being a voice for our stream resources.
Currently, there are more than 6,200 stream teams around the state, and around 100,000 are volunteers. For more information on morel mushrooms, flowering trees, and stream teams, visit mdc.mo.gov. Thanks for watching, and remember, nature's calling. Get out and enjoy Missouri's outdoors.
And welcome back. Joining me now are two of our professors and instructors of environmental health and safety. Thanks for joining us, Melissa Perkins and Teresa Bowman, and talk about this research project and why it was so, I guess, unique and great for your program.
It's unique in regards to the fact that no one has done this type of research, even in, really, we say Missouri, but kind of the Midwest region of the United States. There's very little known about where microplastics are at, which compartments of the environment they're in, and big picture what that means for the organisms and essentially human beings within that environment. So it really allowed us to do a type of research that Missouri Southern has never done, but also a type of research that regionally is not being done as well. So it allowed us into a lot of different avenues in terms of expounding what research we could do at Missouri Southern, allowing our students to be able to do some research that is really unique to what other students get to experience.
And you said you had some grants. There were 2 grants that you got to purchase the equipment. Talk about that.
I was going to say, we had the student research grant, which is funding that undergraduate students can apply for if they've got a research project that they're going to be working with. And luckily, both of our students were awarded the full amount for the grant, which I believe each was $750, which is an opportunity that not every university is going to give to all of their students. So we were very thankful that MSSU had the funding to give to undergrad research students so that we can do these projects and kind of enhance their curriculum. And then we also had the Mose Excel grant, and that was something that was given to the Environmental Health and Safety Department several years ago. And then when we were kind of going through, we were deciding on what equipment we needed to purchase, and it so happened that some of the equipment for the microplastics research was purchased with that grant.
And you were talking about, you did a project on this when you were in college.
Yeah, I actually studied microplastics during my internship in Bermuda when I was going into my senior year of my undergrad. And so this is a topic that it's relatively new, so probably with only the last maybe 20 years has really been taking off and really taking notice, because prior to then, you're not really seeing this idea that, plastics are bad. You're not really seeing like this accumulation effect. But since plastic doesn't really go away once it's in the environment, you start noticing that it's accumulating and it's picking up, and so it kind of starts drawing your attention to it.
Yeah, I watched those programs like BBC and public television about the Blue Planet, and it talks about the organisms and the plastic that's in the oceans. But then if you think about it, a lot of that comes from the waterways in the continent. So it's interesting that not much study has been done about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of where it started, when they were finding the garbage patches out in the oceans. And so that was a huge discovery, like finding that there were all these big areas with giant amounts of garbage, and then acknowledging that a good portion of that is plastics. And I think that's kind of the big picture, is we've spent all this time focusing on oceans. And one of the students in their honors presentation noted that it's about 10% of plastic that gets produced is expected to end up in the oceans. And so there's really a huge portion that's going somewhere else. And so that's where we're like, well, we're small rural streams. Let's see what we have. Let's see what our concentration is, because big picture, we feed into the oceans eventually. And if we're going to reduce the amount that gets to the oceans, we've got to do it on the terrestrial lands in order to get that reduction. So we need to know what exists.
And I was saying how I thought I was late to the game on this one, because some of the videos I was looking at are 5 or 6 years old, but you're telling me that that's really not that long ago in science.
As far as the realm of science and environmental experimentation, no, because when you think about plastics, I mean, they were created probably the late 1800s, but in terms of actual large commercial use, probably 1960s. So when we say that the study behind it's only been around for 20 years, that's a good portion of since plastics have been around. And a lot of that is just establishing methods to even be able to detect them. And so when we talk about like us just acknowledging the fact that plastics in the environment, it doesn't go away, it just breaks down into smaller pieces, which means every plastic that's ever been used is still here on the planet. And we've only been using them for 60 years. So if it's not going away and we're just going to keep using them, eventually we have to acknowledge that they're just going to build up and build up and build up, and we've got to figure out a way to reduce that amount. And so starting out with was just figuring out what methods can we use as far as if we have sediments or we have water to where we actually feel like we're detecting the microplastic concentration that's there, which again was part of our beginning project, was just can we do the methods that other people, so NOAA has established methods, other scientists have established validated methods, like can we repeat those at Missouri Southern? Do we have the capability? And so that's why I say it was overall to try and figure out the microplastic concentrations, but also just like, can we do it at Missouri Southern? And we can. So,
and successfully, it seems.
Yeah, which is great. So now that we've done that, we can now feel comfortable going bigger with it and figuring out other avenues, because that was probably the biggest thing I would say as we were working. It was like, oh, well, now we should look at this and we should do this. And just there's 1,000
Focusing
ideas.
Yeah. But it's exciting for you guys, right? Because you get to do more and better and new stuff.
Yeah, which is what I told the guy. I said, we just need to know that they're here before we try to take different directions with it.
Right. And what programs, or I guess career paths, can these students take once they've done research like this, or what do you encourage them to do?
There's a wide variety that students can get employment in. It depends on what they're wanting to focus in. Are they wanting to look at something that's more environmental management, or are they wanting to do something more of occupational health and safety? So either one has a really good job growth perspective over the next several years. So no matter which way they pick or whatever their passions are, because we have some students that are more safety, occupational health safety focused, and we have some students that are very much looking at environmental management, environmental sustainability. But there's job opportunities, whether you're in a municipality, private industry, or government jobs such as OSHA, EPA. So a lot of opportunities for students.
And is that something that you guys, you or your department guides these students, with research projects like this? This project can take you here.
Yeah, so with this specific project, this would really help these students, one, if they were thinking about graduate school and they were going to do research at the graduate school level, because they ended up having to write a proposal, write grants, write a thesis over it. They had to present, they presented at the Missouri Academy of Science Conference, they presented at the Research Symposium here on campus, they had to present at their honors. So they have done like every aspect of, this is what you do your research as a scientist, and then you have to communicate all of these findings out there. So with graduate school, they're primed to do research, but then they also learned mechanisms of field sampling, bringing things, so analytical methods, quality control, quality assurance, which they could take to lots of different job areas.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And in some of those videos I was looking at, the microbeads, so you guys found them, or they found them in the waterways, but they were banned 6 years ago, and fully effective in 2019. So that's just 2 years ago, barely. But they're still so prevalent.
And they will continue to be prevalent for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Yes. So we didn't find them in our 16 sample sites that we did within the Spring River watershed, but there other studies are still finding them. And yeah, it's the concept of once that microbead was created, it's plastic. It's never disappearing. So if it made it in the environment, it's there, and we'll always find them.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that on the health and beauty products that have the scrub, that was plastic.
Yeah.
I thought it was something that just dissolved.
Nope.
And it's in toothpaste, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and that was an interesting piece when the guys did their proposals for honor. There was actually an individual from the dental hygiene program, and she said back when they were used, they would notice that, and they would get trapped under people's gum lines, and so they would cause irritation in their gum lines. So it was that even prior to them being banned, there were human impacts being associated with them.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So what do you think is important for people to know about this type of research?
To me, the biggest thing that comes out of this is just people being aware of their consumer ability. So when we talk about plastics and plastic being in the environment forever, the only way we decrease that concentration is by us making choices as a consumer. So trying to choose all natural fabrics, which we found because as far
Very
as
hard.
yes, when we
Right.
were doing the research as far as quality control, we had to not wear synthetic fibers because just wearing them, if you do that, they shed off. And so we didn't want to contaminate our samples. And so we were trying to wear 100% cotton. And the first day that we were like, okay, everybody wear 100% cotton. When we sample, I think I found like 2 t-shirts in my whole closet, none of my jeans. I was like, I don't even have clothes to wear to run the research to test for this. And so it became very like aware of, okay, when I purchase this, I am a contributor to this. And so even I would say like buying sheets instead of buying microfiber sheets, buy cotton sheets. And so I think it's really the only way we ever decrease plastic in the environment is by the consumer saying, I don't want plastic in my food. I don't want to use a plastic straw. I don't want to use plastic utensils. It's those single-use plastics that are really going to be very I know there's areas we can't get rid of plastic. You know, there are some serious benefits to it, but we can definitely decrease the amount that we use.
Well, because I buy metal straws to use at home.
Mm-hmm.
But in a restaurant, I can't force myself to drink out of the glass. So I always ask for the straw, and I guess I didn't even think about it from that perspective of that'd be a way to decrease, you know, and, you know, encouraging people to recycle. You know, we recycle plastic now in my household, and it was a chore to get them on board with that.
Yeah, which I say even in the concept of recycling, that plastic's still there and it's still been created.
Yes.
And so even if we recycle it, it's still in the environment. So if we can
Reduce.
Not use it to begin
is
with.
the beginning concept. So yeah, not using the plastic bags at the store, but it's so much of environmental change is the consumer demanding that change. So if we say we're not going to buy that product, that's how we're going to start to make the companies adjust and realize people actually want something different. We're going to create a more environmentally friendly product for them.
And the focus on the environment is pretty big right now, and greenhouse gases, like it gets so much bigger. What can the students learn here at Missouri Southern that can help them with that?
I would say most likely that these are global issues. These are not just issues that are affecting certain countries or certain coastlines or certain locations. It is a global issue because I always tell my students environmental aspects don't adhere to geopolitical boundaries.
Right.
So what gets put in the atmosphere or the soil or the water in Missouri is going to end up in California, Australia, over Europe. So it's really important that we all play a part together because we only have one planet. I don't think Mars is going to be happening anytime soon in my lifetime, at least.
It's cool, but not yet. Yeah.
So we need to take care of what we currently have. And so especially with this environmental science degree and doing this type of research, it shows just how much accountability we should all have. Everyone is contributing to it. That's wearing any type of synthetic fiber clothing, me too. Everything that we purchase that, purchasing, oranges that have been pre-peeled and wrapped in plastic versus just, getting a regular orange and the regular natural skin that it has. So just things like that you really make decisions with your dollars. And so by kind of altering your spending patterns or things along those lines, you can do a pretty drastic amount of change in a short amount of time.
Well, I appreciate you ladies coming on and talking to us about this issue. It's huge.
Yeah.
And there's so many facets that we can all learn from it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. And we wish the students good luck with their future endeavors and their projects to help the environment. This is Newsmakers on KGCS TV from the Ruth Colvin Studios here at Missouri Southern State University. And I'm Bobby Pottruff. We'll see you again soon.